Good evening, friends. Welcome to Christian Parenting, Raising Your Kids for Heaven. Our subject this evening is how to enhance your child's IQ. Our guest is Dr. Neil Nedley. Dr. Nedley, welcome.
Thank you,
Glad
John.
that you are here.
Glad
Dr.
to be
Nedley,
here.
tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get an interest in this particular area of helping enhance or mental peak performance?
Well, I'm an internal medicine physician, but it's been an area of interest really my entire life. And of course, medical school really helped with the study of neuroanatomy and all of the brain chemistry, and I've got fascinated with that. And then also, my area of internal medicine deals a lot with mental health. I also deal with the disease of the internal organs, but I've specialized especially in the mental health aspect of things. And I've had the opportunity of helping both children and adults in this area.
Great. Well, let's get right to it then. Let's start with the definition. What is intelligence? I mean, how would we define that?
Well, it's a capacity to learn, retain, and apply knowledge. And so all three of those things are critically important as far as intelligence is concerned. Not just capacity to learn, but you have to be able to retain it. You need to remember what's at the front of the page or the beginning of the page by the time you get to the end of the page. And often those that don't have high IQ, whatever they read last erases what they read before. And that, of course, is lack of IQ. And then we have to be able to apply that knowledge.
So when you talk about IQ, that's just an abbreviation for intelligence?
That's right. Well, IQ is a way of measuring intelligence. It's intelligence quotient. And there are often tests that are given in regards to that. They're imperfect tests, but they're the best we have to be able to measure that ability to learn and retain and apply knowledge.
What are some of the advantages then of having a high IQ?
Well, there are significant advantages. Actually, the job that you get out of college is directly related to your IQ, studies have shown. Also, how long you live. It turns out IQ is an independent health benefit as far as being able to live a high quality and a high quantity of life.
Now, what about the influences of intelligence? Where do they come from? Is it just sort of we're born with it, or is it something we can develop? What are the influences?
Well, it is something that genetics does have a role to play. If your parents were highly intelligent, there's a chance that you're going to be highly intelligent, although it's not across the board. Genetics is just one of many influences as far as intelligence is concerned. Prenatal influences are also important. Actually, the health of the father at the time of conception is related to the IQ of the child. The health of the mother at the time of conception, and even how that mother is carrying the baby, what health habits she's having, how stressed she is, can have a role in regards to how high an IQ that child is going to have. And then after the baby is born, there are a number of factors, such as whether you breastfeed the baby or not, whether you are providing love and emotional support to that baby. And then other things such as the type of education that the child is receiving, particularly up to age 12, is critically important.
Well, let's talk about some of the myths that have to do with intelligence. Of course, one of them I just mentioned, well, you can't do anything about it, you're just born, it has to do with the genetics. You can't really improve your genetics or your intelligence. Is that true?
Well, it is not true. And actually, the latest studies in genetics are showing, yes, there is a lot that we can actually do about our present genetics. And what is that? Well, our lifestyle can either activate genes that we have, or it can actually suppress genes that we have. And so lifestyle is a critical element. And so genetics loads the gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger, and there are many lifestyle things that can actually bring out positive aspects of our genes in regards to IQ.
Well, what are some of the other myths? You know, genetics, one that I know of is sometimes intelligent people are a little hard to get along with. Is that true?
Well, it is true that some intelligent people are irritating to be around. But it actually has to do with their EQ, their emotional intelligence, and not their IQ. And it turns out that a highly intelligent person is no more likely to have a low EQ than a less intelligent person. And so, in general, high IQ people are not any less difficult or more difficult to get along with than low IQ.
You know, sometimes we think of someone who has a high IQ and we think of the absent-minded professor, someone who lacks common sense or clumsy or something. Is there anything to that?
No. In fact, studies have shown that high IQ people tend to have more common sense than people that are average intelligence or less average.
Now, of course, we spoke a little bit about this earlier. Can we improve our intelligence? One of the myths, no, you can't.
Absolutely you can. Studies have shown that if you pay attention to what's coming into your body, what you are feeding your mind, how you're strengthening your mind, it can actually improve. Even adults, especially children. And so, and of course, this program is geared to children, and so we can really make a big difference in a child's IQ. But even after the age of 18, it is possible to improve your IQ about another 10 points if you stay with the principles that we're going to talk about here.
Well, let's get to that then. What can we as parents do to try and strengthen or increase our child's IQ?
Well, we need to really start from the beginning. When the baby is born, it's very critical, if at all possible, to breastfeed that baby. And in fact, if you can't breastfeed the baby, try to feed the baby mother's human breast milk. Studies have shown that it improves the IQ by up to 10 points. It decreases their risk of later psychiatric problems significantly, and it also increases their chance of improving social class even over where their parents are. This is actually due primarily to the human breast milk constituents. One of them is omega-3. There's 3 different omega-3 molecules that are present in human breast milk. None of the formulas have omega-3. Only one formula on the market has it now, and it only has one of those 3 omega-3 molecules. And omega-3 is very important for brain development. We need it in the prenatal aspect of things. In fact, you know, going back to prenatal, John, I would recommend anyone who's considering having a baby or has a baby now, make sure they're getting all 3 omega-3 molecules, even in a supplement form or through foods, because studies are showing that's critically important as to how intelligent that child will be.
Now let's talk a little bit about that omega-3. Where can one get that? Flaxseed, I understand, has a high concentration. Does that have all 3 kinds that you need?
Well, flaxseed has one of the kinds, ALA. It turns out that our human body can convert that into the other 2 types. And so that would be a basic omega-3 constituent. However, it's also good to try to get EPA and DHA in the foods. And those are primarily going to be in sea plants. Or of course sea creatures. We'd recommend to get it from the plants instead of the creatures because a lot less toxins are involved and you actually get a more pristine omega-3 molecule through the sea plants.
So it benefits the mother before birth to be eating these type of things. What about a child? Is it good to try and sneak that into their diet somehow? Would that benefit the child?
Oh, it does benefit the child. In fact, we've developed actually foods and desserts that all children love that have these omega-3 molecules in them. And so it's pretty easy to get if you are really paying attention to it. However, you can miss it pretty easily as well if you're not paying attention to it.
All right, so we spoke about the importance of breastfeeding right from the start. But as the child gets older, what are some of the other influences that can help enhance the intelligence?
The parents ought to play with their children. And, you know, all different types of play can help out. It does stimulate the brain, particularly if it involves some sort of strategy and planning as the child starts to get older. But that requires a little bit of time and attention.
So that seems to be a big one. The various guests that we have brought that to light, the importance of spending time with your child. That's even important when it comes to developing a high intelligence.
Exactly.
What influence does music have on a child?
Music has a very positive influence in regards to their IQ, particularly if they take music lessons. There was a study involving 6-year-olds, and those who took music lessons for 1 year gained more points on their IQ test compared with their peers not involved in music classes. The benefit was small, but was seen across the spectrum of abilities measured in the tests, including math, language, and spatial skills, which you wouldn't think are related. And of course, the music lessons at age 6, virtually everyone starts out in their music lessons with the type of music that tends to enhance intelligence. Even those that go into the rock music world all start out with classical at age 6 and 9, etc., and it turns out that music is quite beneficial.
Now, you mentioned the age 6. Is that a good age to start? Should we start a little earlier?
It could be started earlier. Actually, we learn music. It's best to learn music the way we learn how to speak. And that is, we learn a lot of the words before we ever learn to read. You know, the old-fashioned way of teaching music was, okay, you're going to start taking piano, and all of a sudden this sheet of music is put in front of them. And they're supposed to interpret that right away before they even learn how to play the piano. And actually, newer studies are showing that if they learn to listen to the music and duplicate what they're playing, particularly if it's good music, it's going to enhance intelligence even before they can learn to read.
Now, if you look at the biblical model of raising children, for example, let's think of God the Father. He looks at the earth and he is looking for a place where he can have his son be born and grow up. He owns the whole universe, and he's going to find the very best environment for his son. What kind of an environment did God choose for Jesus?
You know, that's a very good question, John. And a lot of times people aren't looking at that. Obviously, the Father was interested in his son developing peak mental performance, peak spiritual performance, peak physical performance. The best biography on the life of Christ is written by someone who tells us exactly what that scenario was. And of course, Scripture gives us a lot of allusions to it as well. But it stated a secluded home in the Galilean hills. So there's something about country living. A household sustained by honest, self-respecting labor. A life of simplicity. Daily contact with difficulty and hardship. I like that phrase. You know, a lot of times if we as parents, if we are choosing something for our children, we don't want them to have daily difficulty and daily problems with hardship and with other difficulties. But yet, that is the exact environment that the Father chose in order to enhance his son's development. Self-sacrifice was part of it. Economy. You know, here's the owner of the universe that, you know, has riches untold, but yet when it comes time for developing his son in the form of a human child, he puts him in a home where there's going to be need for self-sacrifice and economy. Patient, gladsome service is part of that home. An hour of study at his mother's side with the open scroll of Scripture. Now, a lot of times we get this idea that Christ was studying the Scriptures all day long. No, it was an hour, but it was at his mother's side. She was the teacher, and it was an integral part of the day, and it was really an important part of his mental development. The quiet dawn or twilight in the Green Valley. The holy ministries of nature, the study of creation, and the study of providence. The soul's communion with God. These were the conditions and opportunities of the early life of Jesus. So with the great majority of the best and noblest men of the earth. If you take a look at the best and most noble people of the earth, they had those similar conditions that they were being raised with.
So as we look at that, well, several things sort of stand out to me. You highlighted simplicity.
Yes.
Honest, hard work.
Right.
Not trying to shield our children from difficult circumstances. Of course, we want to make sure that there's a positive influence. We don't want to put them in a negative influence, but allowing them to exercise their mental capacities to resolve problems.
Right.
And then, of course, the Word of God has been an important part of training the child.
Yes. And patient, gladsome service. You know, in other words, being able to develop patience, to endure, but yet to do that with a smile on your face, gladsome service. That was the condition of his home.
Well, someone might say, well, that's 2,000 years ago. What about today? You know, with all of the things happening in society and the busy pace of our life, what can we as parents do now to try and enhance our children's intelligence?
I think it's important for us to avoid toxins. There are many toxins out there that can actually impair a child's development: alcohol, nicotine, lead. We also have caffeine. Caffeine actually suppresses the frontal lobe of the brain, blocks the adenosine receptors. It actually makes things like gossip more likely when that's on board because our frontal lobe is not fully enhanced. It can stimulate the individual. Athletes might use it as runners, but quarterbacks should not use it because they're going to more likely make a wrong decision. And so it is, if we're really wanting to utilize our brain and analyze a lot of information and make a good decision, caffeine shouldn't be there.
You spoke about alcohol. In other words, kids should never drink alcohol.
Correct.
You spoke about tobacco.
Correct.
So you don't want your child even being around smoking if at all possible.
Exactly.
And then caffeine.
That's right.
That was an interesting one. I mean, even now with these soda machines and these sports drinks that are high in caffeine, it's targeting the younger age group.
Targeting the younger age group and setting them up for an addiction as well. I mean, it gets to the point where they're so used to utilizing it, if they don't utilize it, they feel like the walking dead. And they get severe headaches. And, you know, why set them up for that when it's actually detracting from their ability to enhance their IQ?
What are some of the other things that we as parents can do to try and enhance our children's intelligence?
Well, you know, bedtime is important. And a lot of times in today's society, we view that as something of the past that has no bearing today. Actually, there is a study, a graph about melatonin levels as they vary throughout the day. And when we go to bed early, your melatonin level starts to go up and it peaks at about 2 o'clock in the morning. And then it will stay up really high until the morning light comes. Now, if we have that child go to bed at midnight instead at 2, it would slide that area under the curve so that the peak would start quite a bit later, would peak quite a bit later, and we would decrease the area of that curve by about 50% just by having the child go to bed at midnight. And so melatonin is enhanced by early to bed, early to rise.
Talk a little bit more about melatonin. How does that affect the child's intelligence?
Well, studies have shown that when the melatonin level is high, their ability to retain is greatly enhanced. If you don't have melatonin there, you're not going to remember what you learned that day. At nighttime is where that's solidified into the memory. And so it can be part of our working memory, and we can start to apply it the next day. But if melatonin isn't there, we're going to actually not remember some key elements of what we learned that particular day. In fact, Brigham Young University did a study on their student body and found out there was one lifestyle factor that was more related to their GPA than any other, and that was early to bed, early to rise.
Now, how does sleep affect children at different ages?
Well, they need more sleep when they're younger. You know, obviously a newborn is going to need to sleep more than they are awake, actually. And as they age, they need less sleep. However, most kids, you know, age 9 to 12, 14 are going to need about 10 hours of sleep. And we need to prioritize that time. After about 14 or 15, they can get by with 9 hours of sleep, and by the time they're 18, normally 7 to 8 hours is more the ideal range. And actually, the closer we can go to bed when the sun goes to bed, probably the better off we are. So summertime, staying up later until the sun goes down could be appropriate for at least in this section where we're at today in California. However, in Alaska, we wouldn't recommend that in the summertime, because it may, depending on where you live up there, it might be after midnight, and that's not going to help your intelligence. In fact, if you live in Alaska, it's good to have dark room there when you go to bed at 9 or 10, because if it's not a very dark environment, you won't make melatonin. And so, yeah, overall, about 9 p.m. is a great time.
So the best sleep that a person gets, is it before midnight, after midnight?
It is before midnight.
Midnight.
Yeah, before midnight. In fact, 2 hours sleep before midnight is worth more than 4 hours after midnight.
So we spoke about the importance of sleep on melatonin. What are some of the other factors that can affect the body's ability to make melatonin?
Well, we need calcium in our diet to make melatonin. And a lot of people are not getting enough calcium in their diet. And there have been studies actually showing that calcium is related to IQ, calcium intake, in childhood and in adulthood. And really it's related because our brain can't make enough melatonin if we're shorting ourselves in calcium or our ability to absorb calcium, which would be vitamin D. And so we recommend 1,000 milligrams of calcium a day, which you can get from food, but you have to be careful to choose the right foods. As you can see, some of the foods, such as oatmeal, is not a very good source. I just had a bowl of lentils today. That's low to not really a good source of calcium. And then there's some moderate sources: quinoa grain, rutabagas, and then greens like dandelion greens, mustard greens are moderately high in it. Baked beans are a pretty good source. Sesame seeds, just 2 tablespoons of sesame seeds, 176 milligrams. Blackstrap molasses. Kale is actually a very good green, high absorption of calcium, 1 cup, 179 milligrams. It's high in antioxidants. We recommend kale. And then there are stronger greens like turnip greens that have even more. And then the real high sources would be foods such as filberts or hazelnuts, soybeans, figs. Milk, of course, is high in calcium. But actually, a lot of people don't realize you absorb more calcium from greens or from most plant foods than you do from milk, because cow's milk is high in phosphorus, so we don't tend to absorb as much. Amaranth grain is high in it. Collard greens are higher than even milk. Carob flour is a very high source, and the highest source is actually lamb's quarters. And that is not the hind leg of a small sheep, John. That is actually a green. It actually grows as a weed in our garden, and when Erica sees it there, she always allows that weed to grow.
Now, is there a place you can go to buy lamb's quarter now that you bring it up?
You know, there probably is, but you don't tend to find it in supermarkets, and I think because it probably doesn't last that long. You know, you want to pick it fresh and cook it and eat it pretty much within 24 hours. And I don't think its shelf life is very long.
So you want to have a little garden in the backyard where you can grow some of these things.
Yeah.
What about exercise in affecting the child's intelligence?
Physical exercise is very important in developing a high IQ in a child. Physical exercise actually improves the amount of melatonin you're putting out at night, so that's another advantage. You're going to make more melatonin when you're physically going into aerobic type of exercises during the day. You will also improve your serotonin levels in the daytime, and that can improve your mood, and it can also improve your frontal lobe function, your ability to analyze things. And so physical exercise really should be part of every child's daily activities. When they're young, infants, you know, the Lord created them in such a way that it's automatically a part. For those of you that have infants, I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a rehab program going on in those infants when they're lying there in bed. You know, they're just moving everything around. I mean, that's all physical exercise going on. It's rehab. It's programmed in for them to get that exercise. But when they get older, that programming is no longer there. They have to either be led by a parent into exercise, or they have to choose to do that because that infant rehab has ended.
Let's talk a little bit about diet then and intellect. How do we feed our children to enhance their intelligence?
Well, that's a good question. And actually, studies have shown the best as far as high IQ is concerned is high carbohydrate, low fat diet. Mm-hmm. It not only improves weight loss, but it enhances mood and it actually speeds thinking. And so these people where you ask them a question, it takes them a while to be able to come up with the answer. It's almost like it's a 3 or 4 second delay. Usually that's just due to a low carb, high fat diet. And if they would reverse that and get on a high carb, low fat diet, they'd be able to speed their thinking up. They'd be able to analyze things at a much quicker pace.
Especially for children that are going to school, you'd want to put them on that type of a diet so they can think quickly, clearly, and grasp the information.
Exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about the frontal lobe and how that affects intelligence. What can we do to enhance that?
Yeah, carbohydrates are used almost exclusively by the frontal lobe for optimal function. And so that's another advantage of the high carb diet. And a lot of people wonder, well, where are those carbs at naturally? And naturally, they're found in fruits, grains, nuts, and vegetables. That's the superior diet. That's where you're going to find those natural carbohydrates that will indeed enhance your ability to analyze and speed your thinking.
How much does frontal lobe health have in relationship to intelligence?
Quite a bit. The frontal lobe is our analytical portion of our brain. And so this is where we make decisions as well. Before we make a decision, to make a good decision, we ought to elevate it to the level of our frontal lobe where we analyze, some of the pros and cons. And when we're taking IQ tests, if you don't have a good frontal lobe, you're going to score significantly lower on that IQ test because it's testing your ability to analyze and to make principled decisions.
Now, you brought up the word principle there. We know the frontal lobe also has a great influence on our spirituality.
Yes, in fact, even secular neurology textbooks, John, tell us that the frontal lobe is the seat of spirituality, morality, and the will. And so being raised in a spiritual environment where morals are discussed, cause and effect relationships are discussed, are going to enhance frontal lobe function.
What else can the superior diet, talking about fruits, grains, nuts, and vegetables, what else can it do to help in this, the growth of the child?
Well, it does help in a number of ways. One of the ways as well, if we're eating those foods and not consuming the carbohydrate foods that are most commonly consumed in America, which are not fruits, grains, nuts, and vegetables, but soda pops, ice creams, all of those sugar substances. Sugar has actually been shown to detract from frontal lobe function.
Even though it's carbohydrates, it detracts.
That's right. It actually decreases grades in schools by about a grade letter difference. Actually, when this was first discovered, scientists were wondering, wait a minute, carbohydrates help frontal lobe, soda pops are carbs, why are they not helping? Well, it has to do with what happens when we eat a candy bar or drink a soda pop. Our insulin levels go up in our pancreas to take care of that load, and our bodies think that we've eaten a large amount of fruits, grains, nuts, and vegetables. So it cranks out a tremendous amount of insulin, and then the blood sugar within 20 to 30 minutes comes down lower than it was before we ate the sugary substance. When we eat the natural carbs, we have that nice natural, it doesn't go up as high, but we don't have that corresponding low. We're not going to get hypoglycemic on the natural carbs, but we will on the refined carbs. And once hypoglycemia occurs, it takes about 4 hours for the frontal lobe to fully recover from that.
Wow. Well, we've spoken a little bit about diet and some of the other factors that affect our children's IQ. When we come back, we're going to be talking more about how we as parents can help enhance our children's IQ. Friends, thank you for joining us. We'll be back with the second part, talking about how you can strengthen your child's intelligence.